Thank you, and I'm really happy to be here. But before I start chatting with everyone, I thought we'd start by watching a little movie. So if we could cue the video.
As part of an organized march this evening.
Fast food workers are on strike all over Seattle today. Hundreds marched from one fast food joint to another today, demanding better pay. The
overpassing boycott McPoverty has a message for Seattle's busiest burger joints.
$9 an hour is not enough for everybody to take care of their family.
Safety violations and health hazards. Others claim they're being shortchanged on pay.
Taking control away from the lawmakers and putting it in the hands of voters.
Now at 6, a historic day for the city of SEATAC. Increased incomes for about 6,000 low-wage workers.
The 15-mile march to bring the $15 an hour minimum wage from SEATAC to Seattle.
The push for $15 an hour keeps gaining momentum.
Burning passion for a better life.
All of it to put pressure on the Seattle City Council to establish a $15 an hour minimum wage in this city.
Protesters are at Seattle City Hall right now.
After the yes vote in SEATAC, there's a lot of energy behind this cause.
I'm out here for everyone. I'm out here for me, my family, my children.
Just a matter of appreciating human dignity.
We deserve 15. We need 15.
Workers want more.
And that's what we're going to get.
Seattle has become a leader in the $15 minimum wage fight.
Today, Seattle Mayor-elect Ed Murray announced his plan for increasing the city's minimum wage was
21 of the 24 people on the committee that the mayor assigned to come up with a plan. They've said yes.
And once again, Seattle has chosen to collaborate, and Seattle workers are going to get a raise.
Walkouts, protests, and one rallying cry. Seattle took to the streets to fight for 15.
Fast food workers walked off the job again today. They're demanding $15 sooner than later.
Fast food workers say their power is in their number.
Walk out, we got your back! Walk out, we got your back!
And then they did. It's important for us to be a part of this strike because we want better wages and better pay for the workers.
I never have the opportunity to say, man, I work very hard. I can't even get my daughter new shoes.
Here's what it looks like from ground level. The hundreds of people here screaming. They're trying to surround City Hall with their message for $15 an hour minimum wage.
My name is Uba, and I am a home care aide. I'm also mother of 3 amazing children. I get paid $10.95 an hour, and that is not enough to support a family.
I'm worried that my mother right now is getting old and she's going to work until the day she dies. And I want to be able to take care of her, and I don't want to work until I die either.
It was the culmination of a long day spent at fast food restaurants and other stores around Seattle. Nick Norman works at Target.
I have coworkers on food stamps, on government-subsidized housing. We have a few who don't even know if they're going to have a home next month.
The Seattle City Council passed an ordinance Monday that bumps the minimum wage up to $15 an hour. That's the highest in the nation.
By a vote of 9-0, the Seattle City Council approves an amended resolution to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Well, on Monday, America didn't get a raise, but Seattle did.
Massachusetts will soon have the highest state minimum wage in the country. Bill to raise it to $11 an hour passed yesterday.
The group called Raise Chicago wants the minimum wage to be $15 an hour.
Seattle recently raised its minimum wage to $15 an hour. Officials in San Francisco, New York City, Chicago, and other cities are also pushing to raise their starting wages.
It's obvious
The only reason we're here is because a year ago, fast food workers walked out.
Thank you to all the workers who had the courage to go out on strike.
And it is my great honor that this city is going to take a step in changing the economic dialogue in this country that's gone on for the last 34 years.
When my store shut down, I felt like a person again. I wasn't a Taco Bell employee, I was a human being. And that's awesome.
Let's sign this ordinance.
So, thanks for having me here in Las Vegas. And as you guessed from the video, I'm from Seattle. And I'm both, I guess, an ambassador from Seattle and an ambassador from the labor movement here tonight. And because the theme of the discussion is citizen power, I couldn't think of a better example to chat with all of you about than a real-life example of real citizens exerting power in their city and in their industry that happened in our city just this year. About a year ago, just over a year ago, Seattle became the 6th city in the U.S. to have walkouts in the fast food industry. It's an industry that, as you can imagine, has a lot of stereotypes associated with it. The employees are all teenagers. I'm going to lose my microphone here. It's all people saving for college or for spending money. And minimum wage jobs are held disproportionately by the employees of small, locally owned and family-run businesses. These are stereotypes we learn often from either an earlier point in our life or from the media. But what we have all learned through the wave of fast food worker strikes that have occurred around the country is that none of that's actually right. So what we have all learned through the national movement of fast food workers and other workers that have had the courage to go out and strike over the last year and a half is that a lot of those stereotypes just aren't true. Of America's minimum wage workforce, 77% are adults, 25% are over age 40, 23% are moms. When you look at their employers, 66% of them are publicly traded global corporations that on average pay their CEOs $10.9 million a year and have returned 9 figures worth of value to their shareholders since the end of the recession. When we hear, as we often do, that education is the key to a prosperous future, it's great individual advice. Certainly, I would never tell any child of mine who had an aptitude for science and mathematics not to pursue an engineering degree, because it's an excellent strategy for individual success. But in the aggregate, our nation is producing 3 low-wage jobs for every 1 high-wage job that it's producing. So out of the 20 fastest growing jobs in the economy right now, 15 of them pay less than $15 an hour. And only 3 of them require education past high school. If one had said in the 1970s, imagine someone like, I don't know, Jerry Ford or Jimmy Carter running for president and saying, my fellow Americans, I know it's a tough decade. We have high inflation and high unemployment. We have an oil boycott. We've got all sorts of troubles around the world, and we disappointed ourselves with our adventure in Southeast Asia militarily. But despite what we're experiencing right now, things are going to get better. We're going to see an end to all this inflation and unemployment. We are going to see the fall of the Berlin Wall. We're going to see no more foreign military threats to U.S. soil. In fact, on our soil, we're going to invent new industries which over the next 30 years will create more wealth than has been created in the entire history of humankind. That would have been a pretty hard speech to believe in 1976, and it all would have been true. But then imagine if the speech had gone on. And you know all that wealth? Well, we're going to give 93% of it to the top 1% of income earners. We're going to give 7% of it to the next 9% of income earners. We're going to give none of it to the bottom 90% of income earners. In fact, the bottom 50% are going to have to take a pay cut. We are going to shred the funding for urban and rural public schools. We're going to make debt-free higher education some mythical legend from the past. We are going to bust the unions. import third world wages, export manufacturing, eliminate pensions in the private sector, transfer healthcare costs onto consumers, and make sure that the net economic impact of women doubling their workforce participation between 1977 and 2012 will be exactly $0 in take-home pay for the bottom 90% of income-earning families. Now, if you had given that speech running for president in 1976, you would certainly not have won. But it turns out all of those things are true. America, despite being the wealthiest and most productive nation that has ever existed in the history of the planet, is becoming a low-wage nation. We are doing that despite having record high levels of education amongst our workers and record high levels of productivity amongst our workers. And so when we see what has happened across the country in the last year as low-wage workers have begun to stand up and exercise their citizen power, we see, I believe, the beginnings of an incredibly important movement that, not unlike Occupy, asserts that it wasn't always this way and that it doesn't have to be this way. And that, in fact, even in the 21st century, even in an era with incredibly concentrated wealth and incredibly concentrated power, ordinary people can still accomplish extraordinary things through their collective action. And that's the story of what has happened in Seattle. There was nothing in our water. There was nothing in our atmosphere. There was nothing about our city charter that required us to be the first city in the country to adopt a policy that will take us to $15 an hour for a minimum wage. What that was ordinary people acting together to accomplish something extraordinary. It was fast food workers having the courage to walk off the job and capture the imagination of a city. It was airport workers, and I want you to think about airport workers, people who put fuel in your jets, people who put the baggage onto the planes, but who will never ever be able to afford to buy a ticket on one of them. Now, God didn't do that. People made those decisions. And something about baggage handlers and fast food workers is it's really, really hard to export those jobs overseas. So the idea that somehow globalization or the information technology revolution is what makes a baggage handler or a French fry cook a low-wage profession. True. And so over the last couple of years in our city, we've seen movements begin by baggage handlers, by jet fuelers, by home care workers, by fast food workers to stand up and say enough is enough. And those did, in fact, capture the imagination and the politics of our city. The result, of course, now well known, is that the city of SEATAC adopted in November of 2000 by a mere 77 votes on the November ballot a $15 minimum wage policy that applies to the airport and the surrounding hospitality and travel-related businesses. And that then led to an even bigger policy gain in Seattle, where our new mayor, who campaigned on $15 an hour, really riding the fast food strikes and the public opinion surge to office, as his first action before he was even sworn in, appointed an Income and Equality Advisory Committee. I was the labor co-chair. The guy who owns the Space Needle was the business co-chair, and it became our job over a 4-month period of time to negotiate a nuanced, phased-in, make as many people happy as possible path to $15 an hour. What resulted then was not only the city of SeaTac, the small airport town, and then the city of Seattle, the fastest growing city in the country, adopting a $15 minimum wage standard, but actually other cities following: San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, soon Chicago, soon New York, the DC area, and 6.1 million American workers getting a raise off of the strength of what a handful of courageous strikers had to do in SeaTac and in Seattle a year ago. So when we talk about citizen power, there is one view of it that it's always polite, that it's always somehow involves attending legislative committee hearings or knowing exactly how a bill becomes a law. I'm reasonably certain that a lot of the fast food workers who walked out on strike didn't know exactly how a bill becomes a law. But I'm reasonably certain that the power they exerted caused more than one bill to become laws through the course of their activism and their action. But what we saw on the video screen before, and the story of what happened in Seattle, wasn't about power that exerts itself only by sort of polite, established, and elite forms of expression, but about power that exerts itself through direct action, through people doing what they have always done in our country, and using the power of peaceful protest and civil disobedience to get the attention of those in power and to make change. So my time is almost up. I'm sorry about the distraction with my microphones throughout, but here's what I hope is true. And I think, during the course of the debate in Seattle that I helped lead and that others helped lead, Eric Liu's in the room, who served with me on the mayor's task force that recommended raising the minimum wage. It is reasonably certain that none of the names of those individual fast food strikers are going to be remembered 100 years from now. It is reasonably certain no labor leaders' individual names will be remembered 100 years from now. It is probably true that very few senators, very few governors, very few mayors, and very few CEOs from today will ever be remembered a century from now. If anyone can name your own state's governor from 1914, definitely I owe you a drink later on after the, no cheating, don't look it up, after the event tonight. But what is certainly true is that history is going to remember that at the moment the American dream and the American middle class were at their greatest level of risk, whether a handful of courageous people actually had the courage to stand up and do something about it. We didn't choose to be born at the moment we were born, and we didn't choose to be called into leadership at a particular point in our life when the idea that you could always pass along to the next generation a more prosperous future is, for the first time in American history, potentially a thing of the past, but it will absolutely be our fault if we don't do something about it. And what I hope we accomplished in Seattle was not that anyone will remember any of our names as individuals, but that 100 years from now, people will look back on our city and the struggle against income inequality the same way we now look back on Selma and the struggle for civil rights. Thank you very much.